All right, before we hit the record button, David, you said that you had a pretty good story to tell as we kick this thing off. I know you were up in the mountains this weekend. You didn't get stuck up there this time, so that's good. So thanks for showing up to
I,
work today, buddy.
I actually thought, dude. So Clayton, it's funny. We had to cancel a podcast 2 weeks ago because I went to the mountains, stayed up there with my family. It's crazy. Uh, we were in Keystone 2 nights in a row. It snowed 12 inches, and so I hit up Stu on a Sunday. I'm like, dude, like the entire 70 is closed. It's a
Wow.
parking lot. Like you cannot get out of the mountains. It was nuts. There's no hotel rooms. By the grace of God, I have a friend. We have a lot of wealthy friends. We're not there yet. But he hit me up. He's like, "Hey, dude, are you in the mountains?" I was like, "Yeah." And he goes, "Ah, stay at my place," because he just knew he saw that everything was shut down. But anyways, this weekend we went back up. We got 10 inches of snow, dude, in on Saturday night. Luckily, and got some awesome snowing skiing on Sunday. But I was like, dude, if we're gonna get this again, like I'm stuck. Like it's not gonna happen. So, but anyways, it was fascinating because the not only was it amazing, but we're up in the mountains and I'll tell you, and this I think will go well with our conversation, Clayton. The dynamics of relationships are so fascinating. And it's not only our relationships with our family, but it's observing other people's relationships within their family and then how the families come together and have relationship and business partners and all of it. And it just is very interesting. But I found out this weekend, someone hit me up and they said, "Do you know in our kids' circles, you're known as the cool, strict style dad?" And I was like, no, I don't know. What does that mean? I don't even know what that means. So I asked my daughter, I'm like, your friends are talking to their dad saying I'm this guy. What does it mean? And she's like, I don't know. It's like a military guy that's like cool, but like also like strict and really intimidating. I'm like a teddy bear. I cook you guys crepes and chocolate sauce for breakfast. Like what does this even have to do? So, anyways, I learned something new about myself this weekend, but it was fascinating to me because and I think I'm super excited about this conversation because it's the power of relationships and oftentimes it's understanding who you're perceived to be, who you desire to be, and how you can really impact that entire process, like that entire picture to ideally become the man that you want to be. And something we talk about a lot in TKM, right? Being aware so that you can become the person you want to be and perceived in that way. And so I'm super excited about this, Clayton. I'm going to warn you ahead of time. This may be a coaching slash counseling session for Stu and I the entire time. So I just want to give you a heads up on that.
Yeah, I'm ready.
Good,
Yeah,
good.
that's pretty much what we use this podcast for, is just to
Get
use these as mentorship sessions for ourselves. So
nice.
let's get into it. Clayton, if you can, give us a little bit of background about who you are and what you do.
Yeah. So I'm my name's Clayton Stenson. I'm up in Canada in Calgary, close to the mountains as well. And what I do, I've kind of just fallen into it over the years, but essentially I work with companies that run on the entrepreneurial operating system. And primarily what I love to do is coach the visionary and the integrator within that system on their relationship and how to work together well. And for those that don't know what that is a visionary is typically the founder of the company. They're usually really good at sales. They're usually really good at ideas. They're good at strategy. They're good at high level problem solving, but usually they're not very good at systems and details, and they get bogged down and hate that kind of stuff. So the system recommends you have a second in command, like an integrator, who can do that, right? They can be the day-to-day operator and make things happen and make the vision a reality. And they have a very different skill set. So I work with them. I am more of an integrator, although I'm discovering my visionary side these days. But that's kind of a quick high level of what I do.
Hey, Clayton, and I'm just curious before we dive into the specifics of some of the interrelational stuff that the work that you do. I'm just curious why EOS? Like, is there something about that specific system? And some of our listeners may not have, we're big actually after we hang up here, we have an L10 meeting, the three founders. So we do that weekly and we're big into EOS, but for those who maybe haven't heard of it, just curious if you can give us kind of a background and then give us the why, like why that system? Why not something else?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, my background is the first time I worked with a visionary was at my church. So I got saved when I was 27, and about a year and a half later, I got hired at the church, and I was so excited to work with our pastor because he's a strong visionary. He had a great vision, and I love the Lord, and I wanted to be involved. And then about 3 weeks into working there, I was like, oh, what have I done? The place was chaotic. And to be honest, I struggled for a long time working there because I'm an integrator who craves structure and systems and an order. And so, we didn't have a horrible relationship, but we definitely didn't leverage our unique abilities for the kingdom in the way that we could have. And so I didn't know about EOS at this time, but I just had this sense nearing the end of my 7 years there that there's got to be a better way. And I had this feeling like there should be a buffer between the visionary and the team, just from a practical standpoint of what I saw. Then I left there and I went and worked at a construction company, someone that attended the church, and quickly realized I'm working with another visionary here. So I was able to leverage the gifts, the learning from the 7 years of the church. And he was the first guy that told me about EOS and the book Traction. But I didn't really read it. At first, he just told me about it, but I was busy and dealing with some personal stuff. But over the years, I heard him vent to me. There was a high level of trust between us because I was one of his pastors. So he would vent to me all the time about things that weren't working in the company, but I noticed he wasn't fixing it. He was just complaining a lot. And I got sick of it, to be honest. And I
Sounds
made a
like my
list.
kids.
And I made a list of all the things he complained about, and a list of how I'd fix it for him. And I took him for coffee and I presented it to him. And at the end, he said, "You're promoted. You're my integrator now." And I said, what's that? What are you talking about? And then he gave me Traction, and I read it, and I fell in love. And I think, to answer your question, was I would say is it's pretty simple. EOS. It's not overly complicated. There's 6 components. You don't have to have an MBA to understand it. Like, it's pretty simple to implement. And I implemented it in that company in the next 12 months, and we 22 times our net profit. So it worked really well, and I loved it. And since then, I've discovered a lot of other operating systems, and I've a friend of mine said there's 42 that he's aware of. And I've learned some of them a little bit, and I there's advantages and disadvantages to each, but I think the best thing about EOS is the simplicity of it.
Hey, just curious. So David and I have been business partners in our real estate businesses for a long time, and it's just been the two of us. It's 50-50, right? And if you know us and kind of know our stories and our backgrounds, you would probably make a big assumption that David is the visionary and I'm the integrator. And but we're partners, we're co-founders, we are 50-50. We do everything together, and there are definitely roles that he takes on because of his unique abilities, and then there's ones that I do, and we typically don't get in each other's way very often. We've learned that about each other along the way. We went to college together, we were roommates together, and so we know each other really, really well. And when we started the Connect Man, we brought in a third partner, and we made him a co-founder. So there's 3 co-founders. There's not necessarily like a boss and a executive officer, like, and we also come from the military, so we have this idea of like commanding officer, he's the boss; executive officer, he's next in charge; and there's like operations officer and all kind of like their minions, right? And so we actually were asked a question recently from a guy we brought in. He's a business consultant. He helped us sit in with a day, and he was like, "Hey, who's in charge?" And that was a really hard question for us to answer because we just looked at each other as like co-founders, right? We're all 3 business partners. And again, we kind of know each other's roles because of our backgrounds and our abilities. The question is, do you always see it as the visionaries, kind of like the entrepreneur, the leader, the CEO, and then the integrator is always what you call the second in command, the guy doing all the nitty-gritty detailed work. Do you always see it that way?
No, no, I don't. You know, it's a easy way to explain it to people, and I think it makes a lot of sense when you explain it that way. But there are situations where it's not that cut and dry, right? So I'll give you an example. So I'm exploring partnership with a friend of mine, and in his business, and him and I have talked about, what's the best fit. We're probably both more naturally integrators, but the interesting thing with us, and I hope it's the same with you, is that there's not a lot of ego between us. There's a high level of trust, right? And we agree that we should sit in the seat that will do the best things for the company, right? And I don't care. Like if it's visionary for me, then awesome, right? If it's integrator, great. I can do whatever. Actually, my seat in this situation will be business development, which is interesting. It's not, typical for what I would do, but I actually really love business development. And what this company really needs is business development. So I am going to put I'm working 1 day a week with him. That'll be my main focus. So, you know what? I think the main thing though is that you do need some sort of structure, right? Like you do need some sort of way to know who is where. But if you have a group of people that don't care about ego, right, and aren't narcissistic and can just be and work together for the betterment of the company, then I don't think it matters. But you still do need lanes. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And real talk, what if one of the founders in this scenario, me, is like just better looking, right, than the other ones? Does that play into anything? I don't know. I think that's something to consider. You don't have to answer that question. It's just something to consider.
Depends on the context of your business, I guess.
That's true. That's true. We had considered doing some modeling. We had purchased some fanny packs and we had done some it was all self-proclaimed modeling. There was no
It
agency
failed.
or
Is this a
anybody.
failed.
tangent? Is this a tangent alert, Stu?
Visionary.
So you touch on something that when we were being consulted, I found it to be fascinating, and we really, as Stu alluded to, we struggled through it a little bit, but I think there's also comfort once we came out at the other end. And the reason I want to ask this question is also for the benefit. A lot of our listeners and a lot of our quite frankly the men in the Kinetic Man are entrepreneurs, and a lot of them are partners, and they seek partnerships. A lot of them are doing like real estate type transactions that are bigger deals, like big apartment complexes, and just the partnership is inherent in most of the things that a lot of these guys do, and the things that we do. I'm just curious, how important when you talk about, you touched on it, but the roles and responsibilities. I think a lot of people are somewhat reticent to jump in, especially if they're co-founders and their peers. They're reticent to kind of define those. Do you see that as something that's critical in execution to define? No kidding, these are the roles, and it's actually more beneficial to the business than it is detrimental to the friendship or relationship.
I'd say it's mutually beneficial for both, right? Because if you're like in a visionary integrator situation, if you're crossing over, and stepping on each other's toes, it's going to destroy your relationship, not only your business but your relationship too, right? So I'll give you an example. The first visionary integrator, although they weren't running on EOS that I ever coached, uh, I was explaining to him what the visionary integrator was, and he said, "Oh yeah, I'm the visionary." And I'm like, "Yeah, I know." And he said, "I just hired my girlfriend to be my integrator because I needed help with that side of things." And he said, "You need to help us, right? Because we're going to kill each other if you don't." And I said to him, "Well, I don't have a program for that. I hadn't even started down this path yet." And he's like, "Make one." Like, seriously, like we need your help. And I said, "Okay, well, I'll make something." Right. And in the first session, they like had a big blow up, and I had to be like, "Okay, time out, pause, stop. Like, let me tell you what I see." And I'll just tell you what I said. I said, "You as a visionary have expectations up here of what you want your integrator to do, but your communication is down here. Like you have not communicated anything. Integrators thrive within structure and wilt without it. And you are, not only is she in an industry she's never been in before, but now you're asking her to do things without you explaining it to her." right? And he was mad at me, to be honest. It at the end of that call, I'm like, I don't know how this is going to go in the end. But the next week, all credit to him. He came back. He said, I thought about what you said, and you're right, and I'm sorry, and we need to work on this. So we spent the next 4 weeks like really helping her to get the structure that she needed. And I just went for breakfast with him between Christmas and New Year's, and he said, yeah, it's going great, and you changed everything for us. I don't think we'd be together in business or in a relationship if it wasn't for those 5 weeks we spent with you. So yeah, I think it's crucial for sure.
It's interesting. This topic comes up because we hear a lot from people within our network. They always say that friends shouldn't go into business together, or family shouldn't go into business together. And David and I we were college roommates for 4 years. We were in each other's weddings, best friends, way before we started our businesses together. And then we decided to do our business, and we do life together. We do everything together. And a lot of people ask, like, hey, how's that going? Like, how's that going for your friendship? And there's definitely times where like we don't like each other. Like, we love each other, but we don't like each other sometimes. And there's challenges. And we've had to be really, really intentional about ensuring that our relationship is first and foremost before business. But I know that's not always the case. And I'm curious. I mean, have you seen successful business? Obviously, the one with the guy and the girlfriend. But um, would you give a recommendation to not do business with family, to not do business with friends?
No, I wouldn't. Um, I probably wouldn't give any different advice than I would if it was not business. Well, maybe a little bit different, but I would say enter with your eyes wide open. And, you know, um, I talked about ego before, like don't enter into a business, family or not, with someone who is narcissistic and isn't able to put themselves aside for the betterment of the business. And and obviously values match is extremely important, right? Like there's people in my larger family that I wouldn't go into business with for sure, right? Because there's not a values match there. But and my philosophy is that we should lead people in a way that is not just about the business, right? It's about how do we grow this person, how do we develop this person, what do I need to say to them that might hurt them, but it's for their best interest, right? So I think in some situations, and I would say my friend that I'm considering partnering with, I'm excited to work with him. I know it's going to make our friendship better because we're both very humble and we're willing to have those hard conversations and help each other grow. So I don't know if that answers your question, but it's yes, it is complicated. To be honest, I wouldn't go into business with my wife. I think we're just too similar. I think we would I don't know if it would end well. But I know that because of the self-awareness, right?
I love that you said that because I think, especially with partnerships, I think a lot of folks, particularly if you're bent towards entrepreneurship, you're very, at least me, I get very excited about, or I used to get very excited. I still get very excited about the prospect of a business and doing business and whatever. But I have become very, very much less excited or inclined to seek partnerships. And that has become that has been an evolution in Stu and I working together, doing other partnerships, things going south in different relationships and different partnerships and different things that the scar tissue now. I'm like, dude, let's build and let's grow our businesses and the things we're doing. But like, I'm just not, I'm not super inclined to bring in another partner unless that person, we go through a rigorous, relational, conversational, everything
Mm-hmm.
thing to get to a point where we're like, okay, dude, like, cause we're effectively married now, right? Like Stu
Yeah.
always loves to joke. I mean, he says it, I don't ever say it, but he's like, dude, I'm David's work wife. I'm like, yeah, I agree. He is. But
I don't think I ever said that.
you never said that. Oh, I could have sworn you said that. But I'm curious, Clayton, from a system and a process standpoint, what do you think people should do as they consider entering into partnerships? Not allowing the emotional aspect of, but like what practical advice could you give to help people get to that level of self-awareness that you just described before they jump into a very, very exciting business venture that's going to make them tons of money and they're never going to lose money on any kind of deal or anything. It's going to be amazing kumbaya, which we know
Mhm.
that's not true. But what kind of like no kidding advice can you give somebody to consider, or even like a checklist to go through before they jump into a partnership?
There's a lot in there. I'll just tell two quick stories. One, when I was single, I remember I was at a like a young adults thing, and they said somebody used this story. They said that before you get married, you keep your eyes wide open, and after you're married, keep your eyes half shut. Right. So, and they're basically saying like, do your due diligence, right? Like, you know, experience them, that person that you're considering in different contexts, like they also said in that conference, serve alongside somebody, find somebody, figure out where God wants you to go, and then put your heads down and start going in that direction. And then after a while, look around and see who's going in that direction with you, right? Then move a little closer and get to know them more. So that's like a singles context, but I think it would transfer over right to this kind of thing. The other thing I'll say is, and I got saved through the Alpha course. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the Alpha course. It's awesome. Nikki Gumbel. It's just a place where people can come to ask questions if they aren't people of faith. And in it, and this is old school, and I'm kind of putting myself on the spot, see if I can remember them all. But he talks about the 5 CSs of making big decisions, and I'm gonna write them down as I'm telling them so I can remember how many I've told you. So one is common sense. So is this person in this context? Does this person have common sense? Like, does this decision make sense? Right. Second one is counsel of the saints, right? So don't make a major decision without first asking people in your life that you respect and that have positive fruit and knowledge and wisdom that can weigh in on it. Third one is compelling spirit. Um, so do you have? For me, I'm very led by the spirit, peace or lack of peace. I've had many situations where I've made a decision to do something and I think, man, logically, this just should not make sense. But God's given me peace about it. Right. So I'm gonna consider it. And, I've had situations where I've waited and waited and waited, and like the peace won't go away. And it's like, okay, well, I think this is the right thing. Um, Man, now I put myself on the spot. Let's see if I can get the other ones. Counsel of the Saints, common sense, compelling spirit. Um, I might have to Google it to be honest. uh, but it basically what it's saying is the bigger the conversation, the bigger the decision is, the more of these things you better have. Commanding scripture is another one. It's shocking that I didn't remember that one. But does it align with scripture? Is there anything that's a little sketchy or a little off? And then the last one's coincidental signs. Thank God for Google. And so, yeah, I think, when you're getting married or you're getting into a partnership, you better have all 5 of those boxes checked. If you don't do it. Right. And I'd say some are more important than others. Coincidental signs is, not one I put a whole lot of weight in, but sometimes coincidental signs line up. For example, I was considering coming into partnership with my best friend, and we were having a meeting to discuss it. And then I looked in my calendar the next day. I had a meeting booked with someone who could be an absolute perfect referral partner for what we were talking about doing. And I booked that meeting 4 months ago. And I'm like, that's weird. Right. And the next day I met with him and he was like, yeah, absolutely. We need a partner. I love what you guys are doing. Right. So that's just something that comes to mind. But yeah, eyes wide open. Right. I think visionaries are more at risk of making bad decisions like this because they are much more emotionally driven. right? Integrators do tend to, do um, a little more background checking and due diligence. So if you are a visionary and you have an integrator, trust your integrator on this stuff.
It's good, man. We've had some interesting conversations, the three of us, and then separately the two of us, David and I, just about handling unmet expectations. And you've talked a lot about it on your website, and talked about it in your story between the man and his girlfriend about communication.
Mm-hmm.
What would you tell visionaries and integrators on how to handle that? Like how to handle the unmet expectations, how to communicate in a way that there isn't frustration or resentment or anger, because we see it regularly and we have to handle it. We have an L10 and there's to-do items on that list, but then like 2 days from now, someone like has this big idea and like texts it, right? And that's now the new thing that we have to focus on. And the L10 that we set on Monday, that kind of goes away. And so like how do we as a visionary and integrator and even the implementer, like how do we communicate in a way that we don't bump heads all the time?
Mm-hmm. I think it's short answer is deal with it immediately, right? Like don't let the sun go down on an argument. Don't let, keep short accounts. Like don't let it fester, right? And the same advice holds true for marriage, right? If there's an issue, you know, well, firstly bring it up at the right time in the right place. And the other thing other advice I would have is make sure that you have the right heart when you bring it up, right? I always tell leaders that if you're bringing up an issue because that issue annoys you and makes your life hard, and you want the person to stop, don't do it. Don't bring it up, because you're going to attack and they're going to defend, and it's going to end poorly, right? And this is a Christian podcast, right? So, pray and ask God to help you to have the right heart, that your heart is more about, this is something that, like, if Stu, you're correct, David, it's like, okay, Lord, help me to, to see this from the perspective of how does this, um, me correcting or bringing this up help David to be more of what you want him to be, right? So it's like intent kind of matters more than technique, right? It's like what's my heart behind it. So if it takes, so I say bring it up immediately. Well, if your heart's right, right? If your heart is not right, like I'm sure we've all seen it, right? In our marriages where you bring something up and it escalates and it becomes a war, right? And it ends poorly. So yeah, just make sure your heart's right before you do it. And I've had that too when I was a pastor for 7 years, situations where it's like, okay, I got to have this conversation. Like, God, prepare their heart. This is probably going to be hard to hear, but this conversation needs to happen for their betterment in the long run, right? So that helps, if that answers the question.
Yeah, no, and I think it's amazing. Yeah, just interestingly, the sermon from my church this past weekend, they're talking about relationships. He's talking about relationships, and he talks about expectations. And he said, typically, and you said it earlier, the exact same way. He's like, your expectations are up here, but your communication skills are down here. And so there's a giant gap, and that has to be addressed. And oftentimes, especially with someone like me, that can be addressed um, with time reflection and just like, maybe just be quiet for a second, just think about it, allow your thoughts to, the emotions to kind of subside, and have, work very specific on that communication. And to that point, I would love to hear more. Like, Clayton, what do you do? What is it that you do now, from a professional standpoint? And because I love, I love your website, and I love the title, that excuse me, I love the title that you of your website, and of you, but the unity guide, and that there's a lot to that. And one of the biggest, one of the things that Stu and I and Stephen talk often about is this idea of being a guide, right? This idea of being a guide, and a great Christian author. He's a business author now. He's still a Christian, but I was introduced to Donald Miller as a, Blue Like Jazz, and his Christian works that were amazing. But he's big on this idea of a guide, And so, I would love just for you to kind of explain, what is a unique guide? What is it that you do? And what's the intent behind it? What are you trying to get people towards?
Mhm. Yeah, a couple of years ago, I had to define my brand. I broke free. I had my own. I was working under somebody else's business and decided to break free. And so, I had a coach at the time, and he asked me like, what's the word, like what's the uniting word behind everything that you do? And it was a hard question, obviously, to figure that out. But I realized after exploring a little bit that unity was the word. That I've just always tended to fill gaps and solve problems and bring unity. I don't know why. Just, I think God built me that way. And I realized that's the word. The word is unity. I'm bringing people together. Whether it's, and when he asked the question, he wasn't just talking about business. He's like life, purpose, like bigger picture. And I realized I just love bringing unity, whether it's my church as a volunteer, or a small group, or or in my family or in business. I've always just seen these opportunities to get everyone in better alignment. So that's kind of where the name came from, and I love Donald Miller as well. So that's probably where the guide came from, was the story brand guides. So what I do now, though, there's really essentially two things. One is I'm a fractional integrator. So usually I have one client at a time where I'm working with them in the integrator role, but only, I would call it even more so, an interim integrator. So I'm not there for years. I'm there for 6 to 12 months. Usually there's a issue, that led to the previous integrator leaving or whatever. So I come in, and essentially I bring unity, right? I lead and solve problems and get things running better, and then I help them to find a new full-time integrator that could take on that role. So I have one client locally here that I'm working with right now, 2 days a week, and that's what I do. But that isn't the main focus, although it does take up some of my time. I do feel like God has called me into this relationship coaching for the visionary integrator. And it's funny that you brought up the marriage analogy, because I jokingly call it marriage counseling for the visionary integrator, because I think there is a lot of similarities. Because man and a woman, God made them differently. They have different unique abilities. They have different lenses, how they see the world. Visionaries, integrators are exactly the same. I was actually explaining to my wife one day the kind of the framework that I'm building, and she said, "This would work equally well in marriage." And I was like, "Wow, I never really thought about it," but that was her perspective, right? So I'll do that. Sometimes I do that 2-on-1 coaching, where I'm working together with both of them. Sometimes both of them don't want to come to the table, just like in a marriage counseling situation. So often it's the integrator that wants to come, to be honest. And I don't think it's because the visionary doesn't think there's a problem. I think it's just more likely that the integrator sees the downstream consequences of this relationship not being optimal. So then I'll coach them, one-on-one, how to improve their relationship, because there's a lot of things that one person can do to improve a relationship. Um, and you don't need both people at the table. So those are the two main things.
Hey, how does someone even get to a point where they know themselves? You talk about maximizing each other's unique abilities. Well, what if someone hasn't done the work required, and it's work? I
Yes.
I think David and I have intentionally, over the past just couple years, it's kind of a recent thing to really do the inner work to figure out our unique abilities, to figure out who we are, who God made us to be, and align in that. Um, what would you tell someone that doesn't even know where to start? Like where do they figure out who they are as an individual, and really know their identity?
Mhm. I'd say get around somebody who's done the work, right? Like get a mentor, right? Myself, I hadn't, when I got saved, I hadn't done the work at all, right? And I was in the place where it was like, I'm the only one that's messed up, like I just kind of had this belief. And then I got saved, and the church had these great courses. So I joined one of the courses, and it was like, wow, people were sharing like really openly and deeply. And I'd never been around that before. I grew up on a farm, it was like, you just work, you don't talk about your feelings, you just suck it up. Right. And all of a sudden these guys in this group were like sharing deeply. And I was like, wow, these guys are messed up. It's not just me.
Make you feel better about yourself because they're like way worse off than you are.
I wouldn't say that necessarily, but it freed me.
Yeah.
It's like, holy, I can talk about this stuff. There's a place to talk about this stuff, and people aren't going to judge me. Right. So I don't know how people who aren't saved, and don't have that unconditional love of God can do the work. Personally, because it was that freed me. It's like, okay, I'm messed up, but I'm still loved, so I can be right, and I can start to sanctify and work through all this stuff, right, and not have to worry about what anyone will think, because God loves me regardless, right? He sent Jesus to die for my sins regardless of how messed up I am, right? And so yeah, I think getting around like a group of guys, like in your guys's, I'm assuming that's what you guys do, right? I don't actually know too much about what you guys do, but just getting in a group of guys, like I lead a faith-driven entrepreneur group, for example, and I've led tons of different groups over the years. So just getting around other people that are on the same journey is crucial. And then to be honest, like if you need to get counseling, get a coach. Like I've had tons of counseling over the years. I've been on all sorts of support groups for different issues that I've come up against. So, and just keep walking with God through it, and He'll help you figure it out.
Yeah, I love that, Clayton. You're right. One of the reasons we started the Kinetic Man was to bring men together. But it was exactly to your point. It was the ground rules to join the group are honesty and vulnerability, right? Like you have to be willing to come into the group knowing that nobody's going to judge you, but also being able to be completely free to be vulnerable and to be honest and to share. But the other magic part about that is one of the most impactful things, and you hit on the head, is that guys realize they're not walking this life journey by themselves, and that they can do it. One, they're not unique in how messed up they are. None of us are. We're all messed up. And so it just is what degree messed up and where you're messed up. And you're probably messed up in places I'm not, and I'm messed up in places you're not. And that makes it even better for us to walk together.
Mm-hmm.
But there's also just a ton of comfort in knowing that you're not alone, but also what we've seen that is super powerful is when you speak this vulnerability and your truth, other dudes in the group will be like, "Oh, well, have you considered?" Like those are super powerful words, right? Because you're like, "Well, no, I never have. I've never considered
Mm-hmm.
that alternative way, that process, that thing." And that has time and time again in the Kinetic Man has literally been the catalyst to change a dude's life,
Mm-hmm.
completely change their life, because like I just never thought that was something I could do, and 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 they do it, and it changes everything, right? It changes everything. And so that's the other benefit of being open and honest and being in a group, like you said,
Mm-hmm.
because you are going to be exposed to things that you never even thought about. And that could be the one simple thing that changes everything, right? That changes everything for your
Absolutely.
life.
And I could probably walk through the last 16 years of walking in faith and different, I could tell you like milestones, right? Where this conversation did this conversation did this, right? Like it's amazing what God can do when you get around a group of guys that are trying to do the same thing, trying to grow.
Love it, man. Well, hey, how do our listeners find out more about you? I've watched many of your videos on your YouTube channel. They're fantastic. They're just really really good information. So where do we send people to find out about you, the Unity Guide?
I'm very active on LinkedIn. I love LinkedIn. Met amazing people on there. So that's a great way to find me, or as you mentioned, the YouTube channel, which is the YouTube channel is just called the Unity Guide. So yeah, would love to chat with anybody who wants to grow.
Awesome, man. And give us our your website as well.
It's just the unityguide.com.
Awesome. Clayton, this has been a fantastic episode. I learned a lot, and as you know, quote unquote, the integrator, I have lots of work to do on the visionary here. So
I'll pray for you.
yeah, thanks, man. We'll put some of your recommendations to work immediately after this episode. We have our L10 next, so we'll talk
Okay.
about it. We'll talk
Put him
about
on
it.
the issues list.
I will. What's the
Yeah,
issue?
I love how
David,
I love how we talk
David
about
is the issue.
self-awareness and then we reflect our issues on others, right? We don't necessarily
David,
gain
put
true
Stu
awareness.
on the issues list too. So
Very good, very good. Yeah, it's constant. I think both of our names are constantly on the issue. It's like an ongoing, right? It's never resolved. It's just a thing. No, Clayton, and I really appreciate it. And I think I truly believe that business is a great way to do ministry. And what I mean by that is, one of the big focuses for all of our businesses, Stu and I, one part of it is giving, right? Giving a tithe from our businesses and really trying to focus on giving the business to God. We get together and pray every morning before we jump on a podcast, before we do any of these things. And so there's a constant seeking to glorify God. But business is a beautiful way to do that. And a really well-run business, which is going to be contingent on relationships working and thriving, is super powerful, and it's very important. And so I just want to encourage you and just thank you for the work you're doing, because the things that you're doing to help people and relationships to be their highest and best is driving those businesses, which potentially can absolutely radically change people's lives, whether it's providing a service, whether it's providing a widget, a gadget, whatever it is to benefit other people's lives. It is absolutely critical, and it starts with that relational thing, because if that goes down the drain, or there's everything else will follow. So
that's
I'm
one of the
super grateful
things.
for you.
It's one of the things that really drives me is that, if you think about a marriage, if the husband and wife, if the mom and dad's relationship is messed up, it affects negatively all of the children. And that's one of the analogies I use in a business. It's the same thing. If the visionary integrator's relationship is messed up, it affects all the employees and their lives, right? It's going to make their lives worse, right? So if we fix the top, we can fix, the whole thing.
I love it. I love it.
That's
Well, I don't think it's
fantastic.
a coincidence that you were a pastor and did ministry professionally, and I don't think it's a coincidence that now you're doing this, because I see it as God's hand in your work now, and so I just want to encourage you to keep crushing it, man. Keep doing your thing, because it's a beautiful thing, and it makes a significant eternal impact. So thank you.
All right, guys and gals, hey, reach out to Clayton if this is something you need. If you're the integrator and need to get at the visionary's heart, or if you're the visionary and you need to get the integrator's heart, Clayton can probably do that for you. So reach out. We'll put his links in his show notes. And hey, let's all go take uncommon action. See ya.
Thank you.